My name is Larkin Hale, and before the candles were even lit on my 18th birthday, my father pulled me aside and informed me that before the night was over, I would be signing papers for my Uncle Trent. I smiled, nodded, and let him believe I was still the easy daughter. At 12:01 a.m., I signed something first. Not their papers. Mine. By morning, the cabin at Blackbird Lake, the money my grandparents had set aside, and every piece of land my father and uncle thought they could turn into cash were locked behind a trust they could not touch. My father went pale. My uncle, who had already promised that property to a developer, started calling lawyers from our back porch. That was the morning I realized my grandparents had done more than leave me an inheritance. They had left me a legal wall. The hallway beside the laundry room smelled like dryer sheets and roast chicken, and I could still hear our little cluster of guests laughing in the living room. My mother had one of her church casseroles warming in the oven. Someone had turned the thermostat too high. The whole house felt swollen and close. When I stepped back into the living room, my Uncle Trent was standing near the fireplace with a leather folder under his arm, smiling too hard at Mr. Bell from across the street. My mother, Pamela, was adjusting the tray of deviled eggs on the coffee table like tonight was normal, like this was just another small-town birthday with too much food and too many folding chairs. My little sister Maddie was trying to keep frosting off her sweater. The pastor and his wife were talking to Dad's old business contacts about lake effect snow and supply chain prices. I moved through all of it the way I always did, quiet enough that people forgot I had heard things. That had been true for most of my life. At 11:37, Maddie whispered that she was freezing and asked where her jacket was. I told her I'd grab it. No one noticed the difference between me carrying a coat upstairs and me carrying my whole future there. I shut my bedroom door, locked it, and opened my laptop on the desk beneath the window. Outside, Pine Hollow looked exactly like it always did in November. Black tree lines, a few porch lights, one truck passing slow on the county road. My phone buzzed once. Celia Bender. Her face appeared almost immediately, lit by the warm yellow lamp in her office. She'd probably been there late for me, though she would never say it that way. Celia had the kind of calm that made panic feel childish. "Everything is ready," she said. "We wait until 12:01, Michigan time, not your father's imagination." That almost made me smile. On the desk beside me sat the printed package she had sent over and had me hide in my geometry binder 2 days earlier. The top page was simple: acceptance of successor beneficiary rights under the Halstead Family Irrevocable Trust. No magic words, no dramatic declaration, just a line waiting for my name. At 12:01, I signed. Celia watched, then had me initial the second page and date the third. Her voice stayed even and low. "I'll take the recorded abstract and notice of interest to the Charlevoix County Register of Deeds first thing in the morning. You don't discuss this with anyone tonight. You don't argue, you don't warn them. Let them keep believing they're ahead." I had spent enough weekends at Blackbird Lake to know the difference between patience and stillness. My grandfather used to call patience an action word. You didn't sit still because you had given up. You sat still because you were waiting for the right thing to move. When the call ended, I slid the packet back into my desk drawer, grabbed Maddie's coat, and went downstairs. No one looked at me differently. No one could see that 12 minutes earlier, my uncle thought I was a signature away from helping him sell my grandparents' cabin, and now he wasn't. We lit the candles, everyone sang. Trent smiled from across the room like a man already spending money that wasn't his. Dad rested a hand on my shoulder during the cake, a public fatherly gesture for people who didn't know him well enough to read possession in it. Mom kissed my temple and asked me to cut the first slice for Pastor Neil's wife. I did all of it. That was the second thing they misunderstood about me. They always thought if I wasn't fighting, I wasn't resisting. The next morning, the first crack showed up before 8. I came downstairs in socks and an old sweatshirt and found Dad already dressed, coffee untouched in front of him. Trent stood by the back door with his phone in one hand and that same leather folder in the other. He read something on the screen, swore under his breath, and stepped out onto the porch. Dad stared at the grain of the kitchen table like he could force it to rearrange itself. "That can't be right," he muttered. "It cannot be right." Mom sat from the stove with the coffee pot in her hand and asked if anybody wanted eggs in the same bright, brittle tone women in church basements use when someone starts crying during the prayer chain. I sat down and poured cereal. From outside came Trent's voice, low and clipped, one of those angry whispers that carries farther than a shout. I could not hear every word, only the rhythm of a man discovering that paper mattered more than confidence. Mom set a plate in front of Dad. He didn't touch it. Then she looked at me. "Did you sleep okay?" "Fine." "Good," she said too quickly. "Big day yesterday." "It was." Trent came back in with his jaw tight and his eyes hotter than they had been 12 hours earlier. He did not look at me. That was how I knew the problem was real. If you had asked me what Blackbird Lake meant to me before all this, I would not have started with the house itself. I would have started with the way my grandfather, Russell Hale, checked the dock bolts every spring with a coffee can full of tools and let me hold the flashlight even in daylight. I would have told you about the porch boards that went soft near the steps and how he taught me to press my thumb into the wood and feel for rot. I would have told you about my grandmother, Eileen, setting out sweet tea in a glass pitcher, triangle sandwiches wrapped in wax paper, and that faded green tablecloth on the kitchen table he built the year they bought the place. At the cabin, people asked what I wanted before they told me what I owed. At home, I was the easy one, the steady one, the one who got good grades, kept quiet, adapted, helped. Maddie was younger, softer, still allowed to be sheltered. I was the one everybody assumed could absorb impact without making a mess. Families like mine love girls like that. They call us mature when we're 12, dependable when we're 15, and selfish the first time we say no. After breakfast, I took the trash out through the garage. The metal can sat beside Dad's old workbench, under the pegboard where he still hung tools from a business that was slipping through his hands. Trent was out there again, back turned, voice lowered. "If title isn't cured in 30 days, Gavin Cross is going to enforce the penalty," he said. "I know what the contract says." I stopped with the trash bag hanging against my leg. Shoreline Ridge Development, 30 days, penalty. Not a conversation, not a threat, a done deal with a countdown already running. I eased the lid down on the can without letting it slam. My uncle was not trying to sell the cabin anymore. He had already sold it in his head, on paper, maybe everywhere except the one place that mattered. When I walked back into the house, no one looked up. Mom was rinsing pans. Dad was staring at his phone. The whole kitchen felt off balance, like a table with one leg shaved too short. I went upstairs, closed my bedroom door, and sat on the edge of my bed with my hands folded in my lap. I was not standing inside a family disagreement. I was standing in the middle of a real estate deal my father and uncle had started behind my back, and for the first time since midnight, I understood exactly how far they had already gone. By 10:15 the next morning, I was driving my old Honda Civic into downtown Charlevoix with both hands tight on the wheel and the heater rattling like it might give up before winter really started. Main Street looked almost offensively normal. A woman in a red coat was carrying coffee across the crosswalk. Somebody was stacking salt bags outside the hardware store. The insurance office downstairs from Celia Bender's building had a little plastic pumpkin still taped crookedly in the window, even though Halloween was long over. Life had the nerve to keep going while my father and uncle tried to sell a house that had never been theirs. Celia's office was upstairs, above the insurance place, across from a coffee shop that always smelled like cinnamon and burnt espresso. I climbed the narrow staircase, pushed through the glass door, and stepped into quiet. The kind of quiet that came from labeled folders, legal pads lined up square, and a woman who never raised her voice because she never had to. Celia was already standing when I walked in. She wore reading glasses low on her nose and had 3 files open on the conference table. "Sit down, Larkin." I sat. She turned the top document toward me. It was the trust abstract, neat and official, my grandparents' names printed in black under language that suddenly made every conversation I'd heard in our kitchen feel cheap and amateur. "Your grandparents established the Halstead Family Irrevocable Trust in September of 2019, she said. "The Blackbird Lake property, a savings account, and the investment portfolio were all transferred while they were alive, not after, while they were alive." I looked at the page again, then at her. "So the cabin never went through probate?" "No." "Not even after they died?" "No. It was not part of the probate estate. It could not pass to your father and uncle the way they seemed to believe." She slid the second page over. Numbers. Parcel description. Recorded transfer dates. Enough detail to make the whole thing feel solid under my hands. "Current value across the trust assets is approximately $1.76 million, she said. "More than half of that is the cabin and the land." I let out a breath I hadn't realized I was holding. And they've been acting like it was just sitting there waiting for them to decide what to do with it. That is exactly what they thought. I leaned back in the chair and stared at the ceiling for a second. The fluorescent lights buzzed softly above us. For the first time since last night, something inside me settled into shape. Not relief. Relief was too soft a word. This felt more like the moment a blurry picture finally came into focus and you wished it hadn't. Celia tapped the edge of the file. "I have also had multiple title inquiries on the Blackbird Lake parcel in the last few weeks, enough that I started watching the record more closely." My stomach tightened. "From Trent?" "I cannot prove that from the inquiry alone," she said, "but I can make a highly educated guess." I looked back down at the documents. My name did not appear everywhere. My grandparents' names did. The trust's name did. And somehow that helped. This wasn't some emotional promise scribbled on a napkin. It was structure, intention, planning. Why would he sign a contract before checking the title properly? Because in small towns, people confuse family assumptions with legal authority all the time, Celia said. And because your uncle is used to bluffing his way through preliminary conversations until everyone else catches up. She took off her glasses and folded them. "He made 3 bad assumptions. First, that the cabin was still part of your grandparents' estate. Second, that as long as you were a minor, nothing could happen fast enough to stop him. Third, that even if there was a problem, your family could pressure you into signing something, or at least drag things out long enough to negotiate from a mess of their own making." That sounded exactly like Trent. Reckless, confident, and always counting on somebody else to absorb the damage. I thought about all the little pieces I had dismissed over the years because I was younger and still wanted to believe that practical always meant honest. The first time Dad called the cabin dead money, the brochure Trent once left on the counter about premium lakefront development lots, my mother brushing off Grandma Eileen's insistence that some places should stay whole. She was just being sentimental, Mom had said then. At 12, I believed adults when they told me emotions were the opposite of judgment. At 18, I was starting to understand that sometimes emotions were the only honest thing in the room. Celia opened the 3rd folder. "I kept the beneficiary acceptance packet ready because your grandmother asked me to. She was very clear that the timing mattered. She did not trust your father to respect a verbal promise if there was money on the table." The words landed hard because they were not dramatic. They were precise. Before I left, Celia rested her hand lightly on the folder. "Your grandfather said something the day they signed. I wrote it down because I knew I'd remember it wrong if I tried later." I looked up. He said, "My boys will count that place before they remember it was ever a home." For a second, I couldn't speak. Then I stood, picked up my coat, and told her I needed to go out to the lake. Blackbird Lake was 35 minutes from town if traffic was light, and the deer stayed off the road. The closer I got, the more the landscape felt like a part of my body waking up. Bare trees, dark water through the branches, the long gravel pull-off my grandfather leveled himself, the second porch step that always groaned. Inside, the cabin smelled like cedar, dust, and old insulation warming under weak sunlight. I stood in the hallway and didn't move for a full minute. Then I went to the linen closet beside the back bathroom, the one Grandma Eileen had made me organize every summer by size and season. The note was exactly where it should not have been, unless she wanted me to find it, tucked behind a stack of winter towels in a small ivory envelope with my name in her handwriting. Inside was one line: "If they rush you, don't answer at all. Go to Celia first." That was it. No speech from beyond the grave, no explanation, just a sentence sharp enough to cut through everything. I read it twice, folded it, and put it in my wallet behind my license. On the drive back, my phone buzzed. "Maddie, when are you coming home? Everybody's acting weird." I called her instead of texting back. "What do you mean, weird? Like whispering weird? Like stop talking when I walk in weird? Also, last week, Uncle Trent took 2 guys to the cabin." My hand tightened on the wheel. "What guys?" "I don't know. One had one of those measuring things, laser thing. The other kept taking pictures of the back porch and the path to the water. Uncle Trent told Mom not to say anything to you." The road curved and I eased off the gas. "You didn't hear what they said?" "No, just that." That was enough. When I pulled into our driveway, Pamela was standing at the sink with her back to the window. Darren sat at the kitchen table with a stack of papers and a look on his face I had only ever seen when money was involved. "Where were you?" Mom asked, gentle as ever. "Out." "Doing what?" "Driving." Dad looked up then. "Don't let outsiders talk you into turning on your own family, Larkin." That was the part that almost made me laugh. Not because it was funny, but because it was so completely twisted I did not know what else to do with it. Outsiders, in my father's mind, did not include a developer circling my grandparents' property like a hawk. Outsiders were not the men my uncle had already brought out to measure the land. Outsiders were not title searches, contracts, or penalty clauses. Outsiders were anyone who made it harder for him to take what he had already decided should be his. I stood there with my keys still in my hand and finally understood that my grandparents had not just left me something to inherit, they had left me something to stand behind, a wall, a shield, a line my father and uncle thought they could step over because they had spent my whole life teaching me to get out of the way. 2 days later, my mother sat down beside me on the living room sofa like she was offering comfort instead of pressure. The late Thursday light came in thin and gold through the curtains. The television was on low with some home renovation show nobody was actually watching. From the kitchen, I could hear the dishwasher sloshing. It was the kind of ordinary afternoon that made bad conversations feel more dangerous because they arrived dressed as care. Pamela folded one leg under herself and smoothed her hand over the couch cushion between us. "Your father is under a lot of pressure right now, Larkin." I kept my eyes on the dark screen of my phone. "I know." Insurance on the cabin went up again. Property taxes, too. Everything costs more now. Utilities, groceries, repairs. You know that. I did not answer. She took my silence as permission to keep going. "Families have to make hard choices sometimes. That is what being a family means. You cannot still think like a child now that you are 18. There it was. Not the money, the morality, the suggestion that protecting myself was proof I had failed some test of womanhood and loyalty. "Grandma Eileen said the cabin was mine," I said. My mother did not even flinch. "Your grandmother said a lot of things near the end. People get soft about everything when they know time is running out." The words hit harder than yelling would have. They did not just dismiss my grandmother's wishes, they made them sound weak, sentimental, unreliable, as if love itself were bad evidence. I turned and looked at her then. You mean she was wrong because she cared? Pamela stood up. I mean, life is not built on feelings. She walked back into the kitchen before I could answer, leaving the sentence behind like a smell. That same afternoon, a white envelope from Great Lakes Community Bank sat half hidden under a stack of supplier invoices on the kitchen counter. I did not open it. I did not need to. The return address and the thick paper were enough. Harbor Line Building Supply, final review before collateral action. Even the wording sounded tired. That night, long after dinner, I heard my father in the mudroom with the door mostly shut, talking to someone in the low, flat voice he used when he was past angry and into scared. We do not have the liquidity, Logan. I have told you that. If the restructuring fails, then what exactly are you expecting me to put up? A pause. No, I understand what collateral means. I am telling you there is no way to move that kind of money in 2 weeks. Another pause, longer this time. 287,000 is not something I can pull out of thin air. I stood in the hallway long enough to hear the number settle into me. Then I went back upstairs before he opened the door. I did not feel sorry for him. Not in the way he wanted, the way that would end with me handing over something that was not his. But the debt made one thing clearer. He was not bluffing because he enjoyed power. He was cornered, and cornered men often call theft practicality. Friday evening, Uncle Trent caught me at the end of the driveway while I was heading to the gas station. He leaned against his SUV like he had all the time in the world, sunglasses still on even though the sun was already dropping behind the trees. Got a minute? I kept walking until I was close enough that not stopping would have looked like fear. What? He smiled, all polished realtor confidence. Shoreline Ridge is still willing to hold the number if title gets cleaned up in time. $612. That is a strong offer for that parcel, especially with the slope issues and shoreline restrictions. You play this smart, I can make sure you walk away with $48,000 for college. He let that number hang between us like he was doing me a favor. At your age, that kind of money changes your life. Whose life? His smile slipped for half a second. Don't be dramatic. I am trying to help you. No, I said. You are trying to buy my compliance cheap. His jaw hardened. You think too highly of yourself for somebody who still sleeps in her childhood bedroom. And you think too little of paperwork for somebody who sells houses. For a second, I thought he might actually drop the act. Instead, he pushed off the SUV and laughed like I had said something cute. Don't overplay your hand, Larkin. I got in the Honda and left him standing there. By Saturday, Dad had a plan. Not a legal plan, a social one. We are having people over tomorrow, he announced at breakfast, not looking at me. Just a small Sunday supper. A few friends, Pastor Neil and his wife, the Bells, June Hollister from out by the lake. Nothing major. We should celebrate you being an adult. Nothing major was how my father described every trap before he sprung it. Pamela spent the day making food she only made when appearances mattered. Potatoes au gratin, roast chicken, green beans with almonds, the good pie plate for apple crisp. Everything smelled warm and domestic and false. Saturday night, Maddie knocked on my door and socks in one of my old sweatshirts. You awake? Yeah. She shut the door behind her and came to sit on my bed. I know I'm 15, and I know nobody tells me anything, but something is seriously off. I waited. I heard Uncle Trent in the kitchen this afternoon. He told Mom once it's in front of witnesses, she won't make a scene. I looked at her. You're sure? She nodded. I hate when they do that voice, she said, the fake calm one, like if they say something nicely enough it stops being mean. That almost made me laugh, but it came out more like a breath. You don't have to do anything tomorrow, I said. Just don't help them if they try to corner me. Maddie searched my face for a second. Are they trying to make you sell the cabin? Yes. Her expression changed. Not shock, more like the final click of a puzzle piece she had already been turning over in her head. That's messed up. I know. Sunday came cold and bright. By 5:30, our dining room looked exactly like the kind of family people in Pine Hollow trusted. Good dishes, folded cloth napkins, my mother's candles, my father in a clean button-down, Uncle Trent behaving like he had never lied in his life. The first half hour was harmless on purpose. Weather, school, ice fishing predictions, somebody asking if tourism had really been that slow this year, forks against plates, ice tapping glass, the ordinary sounds of people who believed they were inside a safe house. Then, after the chicken and before dessert, my father tapped his spoon lightly against his water glass. "I just want to say something," he began. "Larkin is 18 now, and that means our family is entering a new chapter. We've had some hard conversations lately, but we've come to a responsible decision about the future." I felt every muscle in my body go still. "The property out at Blackbird Lake has become more burden than blessing," he continued. "Taxes, maintenance, insurance. So, as a family, we're doing what families do. We're making a sacrifice now so all of us can be more secure later." Pamela laid one hand over his. "That is what decent families do. They think of each other first." Every face at the table drifted toward me. I set my fork down carefully. "I never agreed to sell the cabin." The room went thin and airless. Darren gave a tight little laugh. "You're nervous, honey, that's all." "No." Trent shifted in his chair. "Just enough. Just long enough." "This is not the time," he muttered. "Exactly," I said. "The time to talk about my grandparents' property was never in front of a room full of people." June Hollister, who had been quiet all evening, set down her napkin. "Louise would never have called this a family discussion." No one spoke. June's voice stayed level. "This is an ambush, and everybody at this table knows it." Pastor Neil cleared his throat. Mrs. Bell stared at her plate. My mother's face tightened around the mouth in that way it always did when someone challenged her in public. The rest of the evening broke apart fast after that. Doors opened and closed, cars backed down the driveway. The house emptied until only the people who had tried to corner me were left. Then the kitchen door shut. Darren sat at the table, both forearms planted in front of him. "If you keep pushing this, I cannot help you with college. I can barely keep this roof over our heads as it is." Pamela stood by the sink, arms folded. "If you really loved this family, you would not cling to a vacation cabin while your father is trying to save our actual home." Trent leaned one hip against the counter. "And if you had listened instead of running to Celia Bender, we wouldn't be here." The room went still. "My wallet," I said. "You went through my wallet?" No one answered. My pulse did not speed up. It dropped like an elevator with a cut cable. Who touched my things? Pamela looked away first. Darren looked down at the table. Trent said nothing at all. That silence hurt more than any explanation would have. I went upstairs without another word, closed my bedroom door, and locked it. I set my laptop on the desk beside the folder Celia had prepared, laid my phone next to it, and sat on the edge of the bed. The clock on my nightstand changed from 11:47 to 11:48. A few more hours. That was all. Not until midnight. Not anymore. That part was done. Now I was waiting for morning, for office doors to unlock, for paper to do what I could not do out loud without losing the advantage my grandparents had built for me years before I even understood why I would need it. By 7:45, I was downstairs in socks, eating cereal from a chipped blue bowl while the house moved around me like a stage set no one had bothered to change after the play was already over. My father had on a button-down shirt he usually saved for bank meetings or funerals. My Uncle Trent carried the same leather folder he had been hauling around all weekend, like confidence might become legal authority if he held it tightly enough. My mother stood at the counter pouring coffee, stealing glances at me over the rim of the pot as if she could still read the future off my face. Nobody asked if I had slept. Nobody apologized for the night before. Trent checked his watch. We should go. Darren lifted his keys from the table, then looked at me. You've been very quiet this morning. I scraped the last spoonful of cereal from the bowl. Good luck. It was not said sweetly, and it was not said with venom either, just plainly. That seemed to bother him more. Pamela set a mug in front of him a little too hard. Don't start. He took the coffee but did not drink it. Trent gave me a look that was supposed to mean I was being childish. Then the two of them headed for the front door. A minute later, I heard Darren's truck back out of the driveway. My mother stood still at the sink, one hand braced against the counter, listening until the engine noise disappeared. Then she turned. There is still time to do this the easy way. I rinsed my bowl. The easy way for who? Her mouth flattened. She did not answer. At 8 o'clock, Celia Bender was already inside the Charlevoix County Register of Deeds office, and by 8:14, my grandparents' planning had been turned into something public, official, and very hard to lie around. She texted only 3 words. Recorded. You're protected. I sat down at the kitchen table with my phone in my lap and stared at that message until the letters blurred slightly. Not because I was crying, because my body had been wound so tight for so long that relief felt almost violent. Maddie came down in pajama pants and one sock. Did they leave already? Yeah. She poured herself orange juice and looked at me over the carton. Did something happen? Something is happening. She opened her mouth like she wanted to ask more, then closed it again. Smart girl. Sometimes not asking was the kindest thing. At 9:22, my father called. The first thing I heard was traffic and the slam of a car door. The second was his breathing. What the hell did you do? I leaned back in my chair. I accepted what Grandpa Russell and Grandma Eileen left me. You went behind our backs with a lawyer. Celia Bender has been their attorney for years. That's not what I meant, and you know it. I let the silence hold just long enough to make him sit inside his own words. No, I said. I think I know exactly what you meant. He lowered his voice, but that never made him gentler. It only made him more dangerous. The clerk says the cabin is in a trust since 2019. That's right. That is my parents' property. No, I said. It was your parents' property, then they moved it before they died. A long pause. I could picture him standing in the county parking lot, hand on his hip, trying to will the world back into the shape he preferred. You should have told me. You should have checked before trying to sell something that wasn't yours. His breath caught hard in the receiver. We'll fix this. I looked out the kitchen window toward the road that led north, toward Blackbird Lake. No, Dad, you'll deal with it. He hung up without another word. My mother had not moved from the sink. She had heard enough to understand what mattered, not the law itself, the fact that it had refused to bend for her husband. She crossed her arms. You think this solves everything? No, I said. I think it solves one thing very clearly. She left the room before I finished my coffee. The next call came just before 11. Celia first. Your uncle's packet was rejected, cleanly. County would not accept the filing because the chain of title does not support what he submitted. I could hear office sounds in her background, a printer, a drawer closing, somebody laughing down the hall, real life moving around the collapse of my uncle's plan. And Darren? He was furious, she said. Legally, that changes nothing. I almost smiled. Did Trent say anything useful? Only that this was supposed to be simple. That sounded like him. An hour later, my phone rang again from an unfamiliar number with a Grand Rapids area code. I stepped out onto the back porch before answering. This is Larkin Hale. Gavin Cross, Shoreline Ridge Development. His voice was clipped and professional, the voice of a man who preferred facts over feelings and was annoyed to be speaking to either. We've been informed there is a title issue concerning the Blackbird Lake parcel my company has under contract through Trent Hale. There is more than a title issue, I said. My uncle never had authority to sell that property. A pause. Papers shifting. Celia Bender has confirmed that your grandparents transferred the property into an irrevocable trust in 2019. That's correct. Are you interested in entertaining a direct offer through the trust? No. He did not argue. Men in his line of work knew when they were speaking to greed and when they were not. Understood. Then our attorneys will proceed against the party who represented otherwise. That sentence landed with more force than yelling would have. Shoreline Ridge did not need to be good people for karma to work. They only needed to protect themselves. After lunch, Celia sent over a scan of the rejected packet Trent had tried to file. She called a few minutes later. There is something else. I sat on the edge of my bed with the file open on my screen. What? One of the acknowledgement stamps does not appear to match the county notary register. I did not say anything for a second. Meaning? Meaning I'm not making accusations over the phone, she said. I am telling you your uncle has given himself a larger problem than a failed recording, if anyone decides to look closely. That was exactly the kind of answer Celia gave when something was serious enough to matter and early enough not to dramatize. By 3 o'clock, the town had begun doing what small towns do best. Nobody announced anything. Nobody needed to. June Hollister stopped by Gloria's market and was seen talking to the owner near the dairy case. Pastor Neil passed my father after church committee cleanup and only offered a nod instead of his usual handshake. Mrs. Bell texted my mother that Sunday supper had felt uncomfortable and she hoped everybody was all right, which in small town language meant everyone was definitely not all right. On Main Street, a man who ran the bait shop told somebody else that land deals around the lake got messy when people moved too fast. By dinner, the shape of our family's humiliation had started to spread in outlines. When Darren finally came home, he looked 10 years older than he had at breakfast. He set his keys on the table and stayed standing for a while, like sitting down would make everything official. Pamela put a plate out for him. He ignored it. The bank is done waiting, he said at last. I looked up from the chair by the window. How much? He laughed once with no humor in it. Now you want numbers. You've been using numbers to justify this all week. He pressed his hands flat to the table. 287,000, commercial loan. If I cannot post new collateral or close a liquidity gap, they move to the next stage. You mean they start taking things? He stared at me. Yes. Pamela jumped in too fast. Your father is trying to save this family. From what? I asked. From the consequences of his own decisions? Her face went tight. You have never had to hold a household together. You have no idea what it costs to make hard choices. I almost said something cruel then. Something about how nobody had asked me what it cost to be the family member they always spent first, but I did not. Darren dropped into the chair across from me. That cabin could have fixed this. No, I said, it could have delayed it. He looked at me like he wanted to hate me cleanly, and couldn't because hate is easier when the other person has actually done something wrong. That night, after everyone had retreated to separate corners of the house, the phone rang in the living room. Trent. I could tell by the way my father answered on the first half ring. The walls in our house were thin. I did not hear every word, only the ones that carried. Penalty clause, broker review, lawyer, title, sign mismatch. My father's voice kept dropping lower, like if he spoke softly enough, the truth might shrink with him. I stood at the top of the stairs in the dark, one hand resting on the banister, listening to the wreckage take on shape. I was not happy.
That is the part people misunderstand about getting what is rightfully yours after someone tries to take it. They imagine triumph. They imagine clean relief. What I felt was heavier than that, more permanent. The law had held. The trust did exactly what my grandparents built it to do. And still, standing there in the half-dark of my parents' house, hearing my father struggle to lower his voice around the sound of his own failure, I knew something had ended that was never going to start again.
The first letter arrived 9 days later in a thick white envelope from a law firm in Traverse City. It was addressed to Trent Hale at my parents' house because he still used that address on enough business paperwork to make it convenient when things were going well and catastrophic when they were not. I saw it on the kitchen counter before he did. Shoreline Ridge Development, LLC, had moved from irritated phone calls to something colder and more expensive. By the end of that week, Trent's broker had opened an internal review. By the week after that, the problem with the acknowledgement stamp on the rejected packet had turned from an embarrassing technical issue into the kind of thing people lowered their voices about in public. Nobody in Pine Hollow needed details to know a man's luck had changed. They only needed to see him stop parking out front at church. Darren did not contest the trust. Celia made that decision for him before he could waste what little money he had left pretending principle was on his side. She sent over copies of the trust language, the witness pages, the recording confirmations, and a short letter that might as well have said, "Try it if you want to lose faster." He folded before he filed. By mid-July, Harbor Line Building Supply was under contract to one of Dad's old competitors out near Petoskey. He sold low because he had no room left to negotiate. He called it a strategic exit once to a man from Rotary, but nobody in town was confused. Great Lakes Community Bank got enough to work with. He kept the house, barely. What he lost was the thing he had been trying hardest to protect, which was not the business itself, but the version of himself that believed he could still decide the shape of everybody else's future. My mother went back to work 3 mornings a week at a clinic near Petoskey, sitting at the front desk under bad fluorescent lights and saying she wanted to keep busy. In Pine Hollow, women usually say they want to keep busy when life has already made the decision for them. People were polite to all of us. That was almost worse. Mrs. Bell smiled too carefully at the grocery store. Pastor Neil asked my father how he was doing in the tone people use when they are afraid the answer might be honest. June Hollister stopped by once with blueberry muffins for me and did not bring up the county office or Shoreline Ridge or Trent's broker review. She just said, "Your grandmother never liked people touching what they had not built." I did not feel victorious. That is the truth no one likes in stories like this. You imagine the trap springs shut, and the person who set it deserves whatever comes next, and then maybe you smile and finally sleep. What I felt was less dramatic and much heavier. It was like a muscle unclenching after being tight so long it had forgotten to rest. At the end of August, I drove out to Blackbird Lake alone. The screen door still caught low on the frame before it gave way with that soft protest I had known since childhood. Inside, the air held the same dry wood smell, the same faint trace of lemon oil Grandma Eileen used on the kitchen table. I stood in the living room for a long minute, listening to the quiet. Not silence exactly, the hum of the refrigerator, the creak of the floor under my own weight, wind moving somewhere through the pines. Celia had texted that morning, "Check the drawer by the front window. He wanted you to have it once this was settled." The envelope was exactly where she said it would be, thin, cream-colored, my name on the front in my grandfather Russell Hale's slanted handwriting. I opened it, standing up. He did not waste words. He wrote the way he talked, plain and clean and impossible to misunderstand. He said he knew his sons would see cash where he saw history. He said that did not make them monsters, but it did make them the wrong people to leave in charge of a place that required care before profit. He wrote that he had chosen me not because I was fragile, and not because he felt sorry for me, but because I was the one who asked which board on the dock needed replacing before I ever asked what the lakefront was worth. The last line made me sit down in his chair before I finished reading it the second time. Take care of the place that kept you steady. It knew you before the rest of them did. I folded the letter and set it on the table with both hands, like it had weight beyond paper. An hour later, Celia called. There is one more thing your grandparents set aside, she said, separate from the main trust assets, an education fund established in 2020. I leaned back in the porch chair and watched the water flash between the trees. How much? Original amount was $48,000, with growth just under 56.7 now. For a second, I did laugh then, though it came out rougher than I meant it to. 48,000, the exact number Trent had held out to me in the driveway like bait for a simpler, cheaper version of my life. Your grandmother liked symmetry, Celia said. So did my grandfather. The following week, I asked my parents to meet me at Maple and Main in downtown Charlevoix, neutral ground, public enough that nobody could rewrite the tone afterward. Darren got there first. Pamela arrived 3 minutes later with her purse held tight against her side. We ordered coffee. Nobody touched it for a while. I need to say this clearly, I told them. The cabin is not for sale. Not now, not later, not when things get tight, not when somebody offers more, not when it would make your lives easier. Pamela opened her mouth, but I kept going. I am not cutting you out of my life today. I'm not doing a dramatic goodbye speech, but if we have any relationship after this, it will be built on respect, not guilt, not on you calling it family every time you want something from me. Darren stared into his cup. I don't know how to fix this. You start by not calling it responsibility when you mean taking something that was never yours. Pamela looked up then, eyes tired and sharp all at once. Everything got bigger than we thought it would. No, I said, it got exactly as big as it was. You just thought I'd stay small. Neither of them had an answer for that. A few Sundays later, Maddie showed up at the cabin with a pizza box, 2 root beers, and a backpack stuffed badly enough that it was obvious she had packed in a hurry. Can I stay over? I took the backpack from her shoulder. You even brought the plaid pajama pants. Serious commitment. She smiled for the first time in what felt like weeks. We ate on the porch with the box between us and the lake turning copper under the late afternoon sun. She picked at the crest and finally said, I'm sorry, nobody asked what you wanted. I should have said something sooner. You were 15, I said. You were not the one running a land deal out of our kitchen. She laughed into her soda, then leaned her head against my shoulder for 1 second, just enough. We spent the rest of the evening playing cards and talking about her biology teacher, college tours, and the neighbor's black lab that kept swimming to the wrong dock, like every shoreline belonged to him by birthright. By the time September came, I had filled out my enrollment forms for North Central Michigan College in Petoskey. Under mailing address, I wrote, The Cabin at Blackbird Lake. I stared at it for a full minute after the ink dried. That was the real change. More than the trust, more than the calls from lawyers, more than Trent learning how fast a confident man can become a cautionary tale. For the first time in my life, I was writing down a place that was mine without apology. Some mornings now, I sit on the porch in my grandfather's chair before the sun is all the way up. The water looks almost black at first light. The dock boards hold the night cold longer than the grass. Somewhere across the lake, a screen door always slams before 7. I did not win against my family. There is no clean victory in watching people you love choose themselves over what is right. I only kept hold of the thing they thought I would eventually hand over, because I had been trained my whole life to make myself easy for other people to live with. My grandparents could not make their sons kinder. They could not make my parents honest. They could not stop greed from entering a house through the side door and calling itself necessity. But they did leave me a place to stand, and in the end, that was enough. If you have ever had a place, a promise, or a person that held you steady when your own family could not,
I hope you hold on to it hard. And if this story stayed with you, tell me what that thing was. I read every comment. And if you want more stories like this, stay with me for the next one.